Hello everyone. Today we're going to be going over USACO 2019 January contest, the bronze first problem, which is shell game. So in this problem, to pass the time, Bessie, the cow, and her friend Elsie like to play a version of the game they saw at the county fair. To start, Bessie puts three inverted shells on the table and places a small round pebble under one of them. At least she hopes it's a pebble. She found it on the ground in one of the pastures. Bessie then proceeds to swap pairs of shells while Elsie tries to guess the location of the pebble. And basically, all this is saying is that in the original version of the game, the player was allowed to see the initial position of the pebble, but in this, I guess in this version, they don't know, or I guess the guesser doesn't know the initial location of the pebble and can guess the location after every swap. And so, given the swaps and the guesses, but not the initial pebble location, we have to determine the highest possible score Elsie could have earned. And so, right off the bat, we can tell that this is a simulation question, which just means that we're trying to simulate whatever problem we're given. We're not trying to do anything fancy, we're just trying to translate some physical actions or a story into code. And so the input goes like this. It's just the first line of the input file contains an integer n, giving the number of swaps, and the constraints are from 1 to 100. So this is n here, so we know that we're going to have three swaps. And each of the next n lines describes a step of the game and contains three integers a, b, and g, indicating that shells a and b were swapped by Bessie, and then Elsie guessed shell g after the swap was made. All three of these integers are either 1, 2, or 3, and a will not be equal to b. And for the output, we just output the maximum number of points that Elsie could have earned. So if we look at the sample input here, right, so we have three swaps. In the first swap, we swap 1 and 2, right, and then we guess that it's under 1. In the second swap, we swap 3 and 2, and then we guess that it's under position 1. And in the third swap, we guess 1 and 3, and we guess that it's under position 1. And the sample output is 2. So this might be a little, might be a little too much, and it's confusing because it's in numbers. And so let's go ahead and look at it in just a much more simpler format. Okay, so if we view the shells and pebbles in this format, right, instead of viewing the shells as numbered spaces, we're viewing them as Boolean containers. So true would mean that it contains a pebble, and false would mean that there's no pebble. So obviously the check marks here are true, and the x's are false. And so if we have a check mark in the first position, that means that it contains the pebble here, right? So because we need to find the maximum score, we need to go through the starting position of each place. So we start at 1, we start at 2, and we start at 3, and we just compare them all in the end. So if we start in position 1, right, let me actually write out the swaps that we make from the sample input itself. So we have 1, 2, 1, and then we have 3, 2, 1, and then we have 1, 3, 1. So 1, 2, 1 basically means that we're swapping 1 and 2, right? And we do that here. And then we're guessing that it's at 1. And it's not at 1 here, so I guess that's not a correct guess, and there's no point to be added there. And then for the second one, we will swap 3 and 2. So we swap 3 and 2, and there is still nothing at space 1, and we're still guessing space 1, right? We guess space 1 for all three swaps, and so just have that in mind. And there's still nothing at space 1. And then finally for the last swap, we swap 1 and 3. So 1 and 3 are swapped here. And finally, the pebble is under space 1. And Elsie guesses that the pebble is under space 1 here, and she's correct. So the total number of points that she earns, assuming that the pebble started under position 1, is 1 point. So she earned 1 point here. Now position 2, right? So the pebble will start here in the middle, position 2. And then remember that these are not indexes, these are positions. So this is position 1, position 2, position 3, right? And then we do the same thing, swap 1 and 2, swap, and then we swap 3 and 2. Notice how these are both x's, so even if we swap them, it's the same. And then we swap 1 and 3, swap 1 and 3. And as you can see, we guessed we guessed that it was under space 1 all 3 times, right? And it was correct 2 times. So we would get 2 points here. Finally, for position 3, I think you guys got the hang of it by now, right? We swap 1 and 2, then 3 and 2 right here, and then 1 and 3. And as you can see here, there's x's in position 1 only, and so that means we earned 0 points. So the greatest amount of points that we could have earned is in position 2, right? And that we could have earned 2 points if we started in position 2. So because this is simulation, right, we're just trying to simulate the outcomes, and we're just trying to see which one gives us the most amount of points. And so it's a pretty straightforward problem, and now we can begin programming. Okay, so to speed things up, I've already added some code to begin with. So we have our import statements here, and then we have some static variables. So this is our scanner, it's gonna read in our input. This is our print writer, it's gonna write to the out file. This is our int n, right? This is one of the variables that we need to take in as input. And this is an array list called swaps, which consists of string arrays. I'll explain that later. And this is just gonna be also in our input, it's gonna be the 1, 2, 1 that we saw. And then in our main method, right, I'm just creating the scanner and the print writer. I'm then calling the initialize and solve methods, and then I'm closing the scanner and print writer. And in the initialize method, I'm just taking in n, and then I'm taking in every single line of input using this string tokenizer, and then I'm splitting it up, right, using spaces. And then in the array list swaps, what I'm doing is I'm adding a new string array, and that string array will contain 1, 2, and 1 for the first line, right? So that's going to be A, B, and G. And it's just a lot simpler to use it like this way, right? It just makes it easier on ourselves later in the solve method. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to create a couple variables. The first one being the shells Boolean array. And so basically the shell array is going to hold 3 falses, right? And then this is just going to be the shells, right, that are being swapped around. And false means that there's no pebble under it, and then the true means that there is a pebble under it. And then we're going to have an integer called answer that equals 0. Okay, pretty straightforward so far. And this answer is just going to represent our final answer, right? And it's just going to be the maximum amount of points that Elsie can earn. First, we're going to have, and then after that, we're going to have a for loop. And then it's just going to be iterating 3 times. And all this is going to be doing is just simulating the pebble starting at the first cup or first shell, second shell, and third shell. And then what we're going to do is we're going to make it so that the shells z equals true, so that means that the pebble is under that shell. And then we're going to say int count equals 0, and the count variable will just be noting how many points we get in the current iteration. After that, we're going to have a for loop, and it's going to go through every single one of the swaps. And then after we have that for loop set up, we're going to make 3 variables that represent A, B, and G. Now, since A, B, and G are pretty generic and confusing, I'm going to name them swap1, swap2, and swap3. So swap1 is going to be equal to the integer value of swaps dot get I, and then it's going to be the first string in that array of strings. So remember that our swaps, right, is basically just an array list that has a string array inside of it, right? So it's basically just going to be multiple string arrays, right, that are in an array list. And in those string arrays, right, we're going to have the A, B, and G. So A would be index 0, B would be index 1, and C would be index 2. And so index one just means that we're going to get the A, right? And that's what we want here. And then for swap two, we're just going to copy this, except we're going to have one, right? Because we want B now. And finally, for the gets, we're going to have two, okay? So now we have our A, B, and G set up. And now what we need to do is we need to swap one and two, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to make a Boolean temp equal to shells swap one, right? And then we're gonna do swap shells swap one equals shells swap two, and then shells swap two equals 10. Now we can't just do shells swap one equals not shell swap one and shell swap two equals not shell swap two, because there can be an instance where um, both of them are just false, right? And so if they're both false and we just do the not, then it could make both of them true, and that's not what we want. So we're just going to do it the old-fashioned way that we always use, right? And then what we're going to do is if bells and then yes count plus plus. This basically just means that if Elsie gets the pebble position right, then we're going to add a point to our count. And then that's pretty much it for this for loop. We're going to make a for loop outside of it. That's going to be going through the entire shells shells array, and it's going to just reset all the values. So I equals 0, I is ascend shells dot only. And as you can see, we're just going to be iterating through shells and I plus plus. And then in this array, all we're going to do is just going to do shells I equals false to reset everything. And then that's just going to make it so that we can, once we go back to this, right, once we go here, then we're able to, it's not going to have two true values, right? Everything's going to be false and perfectly reset for us. Oh, and one more thing. For our swap one, swap two, and guess, we need to make sure that we have a -1 at the end of everything. And this is because these numbers are given in just regular numbers, not indexes. So we need to subtract one so that it matches with this. Now we could add a false in the beginning here, but that's just gonna add a little bit more to our time complexity. And obviously, if an answer works, it works, but it's always nicer to have less time complexity. So we're just gonna have 3 falses and we're gonna do -1s here. And so pretty straightforward stuff. And then what we're gonna do next is we're gonna do if count is greater than x, then answer equals counts. And then all that's doing is it's just it's in the code, but if count is greater than answer, then answer is now equal to count. Finally, we're going to do out.println, and then we're going to do our answer in here. And then if we click submit here, as you can see, it's getting the test cases correct and it passed. So thank you guys for watching, and if you guys have any questions or comments, please feel free to leave them down below.